Hi guys, Dr. Rob Barrington here with some more nutrition advice. I wanted to talk today a little bit about grazing and the grazing style of eating. It's quite difficult to categorize and describe grazing because it will differ between different people, and it's obviously not the same in humans as it would be for grazing animals, for example. But if we give it a broad definition of eating smaller meals more often, I think that encompasses the reasons why it has benefits. Now, grazing is something that will be familiar to athletes and bodybuilders. It's something that bodybuilders really, it's one of their mantra in terms of the fact that it's a very good way of increasing your nutrient content of your day without overloading your system. And it's this nutrient overload that I think really is the problem with typical Western diets and our modern way of eating. I think we've become too busy to eat slowly and eat smaller meals, and what we tend to do is we work and we work and we work until we have no more capacity to work, and we get so hungry that we eat, and then we tend to eat too much. And really, I think grazing has an advantage in that it actually fits very well in with modern life, because if you prepare the food beforehand, grazing is actually something that's very good to do if you're busy, because it allows you to concentrate on what you're doing without having to take time off to prepare and eat food. I really wanted to have a look, have a discussion, really talk about the biochemical aspects of overnutrition, because this is interrelated with grazing. Now, why grazing is beneficial, but what are the advantages of grazing other than the fact that I think it's, well, from my opinion, is that it's convenient for modern life? There appears to be two advantages to grazing over the standard 2 or 3 meals a day strategy that most people employ in their nutrition. The first benefit is that you have nutrients available to your body at all time. If you graze, your blood sugar levels tend to stay higher. If you graze, the amino acids that are available to your plasma tend to be there all the time, and therefore there's an anabolic component to this. If you're interested in training, if you're interested in physical activity and improving your physical performance, grazing is a very good way of providing your body with nutrients throughout the day. And this is really why athletes and bodybuilders are interested in grazing and this style of eating. But it has another advantage, and that is to do with overnutrition and nutrient overload. If you're grazing and you're eating smaller meals more often, you tend not to supply overnutrition to your cells. You tend not to overload them with nutrients. In other words, you're trickling your nutrition throughout the day into your blood, and this provides a constant amount of amino acids and glucose and fatty acids, and it prevents overloading the cells with nutrients. And this may have benefits in terms of the fact that it may prevent insulin resistance and the formation of too much body fat. And again, this goes back to bodybuilders and athletes of why they're interested in this style of eating. Now, if you have a look at the biochemical aspects, the physiological aspects of why this may be so, I think this may be this is certainly theory, but I think this may be the reason that this style of eating seems to have these benefits. Now, if we look at fructose, for example, which is very high in the typical Western diet, if you eat a typical Western diet, you tend to eat infrequently, maybe 2 or 3 meals a day, and those meals tend to be large meals. They tend to have high amounts of poor quality foods in them. In particular, fructose has been identified as being one of those foods, but fructose is also present in a lot of, for example, snacks that would be eaten between those meals as well. Soft drinks, for example, have high amounts of fructose. So if we're eating a typical Western diet and we're following a typical Western nutrition plan, we tend to have too much fructose in our diet. That fructose can only really be metabolized by the liver. And in the liver, it stimulates the de novo lipogenesis pathway. That pathway creates new fatty acids, and those fatty acids appear to accumulate in the liver, and they accumulate in peripheral tissue like the skeletal muscle, and they interfere with the insulin receptor, the insulin signal cascade, and that might be one of the causes of insulin resistance. Now, that's obviously a problem, but if we have a look, we exclude fructose because it is a specific case. If we have a look at the typical Western diet from the point of view of eating large meals, we still get nutrient overload, but it might occur in a slightly different biochemical route. A typical Western diet, most people who eat that diet consume too many refined carbohydrates, and these are particularly bad because of the fact that the fibre is missing. The glucose from the starch in these carbohydrate foods gets into the blood very quickly, and this provides cells with a large amount of glucose in a small amount of time. So if you imagine a typical Western meal, let's say refined pasta, and it's eaten in a single sitting, quite a large amount of energy. That contains very little fibre. The starch is broken down very quickly. The glucose from the starch is absorbed very quickly. And within a relatively short amount of time after eating that pasta, the blood glucose levels rise very rapidly, and this energy has to go somewhere, and it enters the cells. The cells become flooded with energy, with glucose and fatty acids, and the cells really don't have much time to deal with the energy, so they start to oxidize the energy. They start to produce energy, and they'll produce acetyl-CoA, which will go into the citric acid cycle. They'll produce electron transport intermediates such as NADH and FADH2. The electron transport chain will be stimulated to produce energy. Now, this is obviously a normal, natural process, but if the amount of energy that's supplied to the cell increases, the amount of oxidation it will produce will increase. Now, the problem with this is that oxidation of substrates such as glucose and fatty acids generate free radicals. And if you have a large amount of glucose and a large amount of fatty acids going into the cells, you stimulate the electron transport chain and produce large amounts of energy, but that energy produces large amounts of free radicals. And if you do this too often, if you provide too much energy to the blood, which then provides too much energy to the cells, you're constantly stimulating the electron transport chain to produce free radicals. Now, over time, that depletes the cell of its antioxidant defenses, and this creates a situation in the cell where you have oxidative stress, and the tissues as well. Obviously, this oxidative stress will become systemic. This may be why we tend to find low levels of antioxidants in the obese and those people with insulin resistance. Now, it's interesting that one of the counter-regulatory mechanisms by which the cell may try to prevent this oxidative stress is through desensitizing the insulin receptor. Now, if the cell desensitizes the insulin receptor, that means less glucose will be able to get into the cell, and this will then slow the passage through the electron transport chain, which will reduce the amount of free radicals that are produced. So insulin resistance may actually be a counter-regulatory mechanism that is enacted by cells in order to prevent this oxidative stress. And this oxidative stress in turn comes from nutrient overload. And I've been going on about nutrient overload for a long time, both through consuming fructose and consuming refined carbohydrates. And I think this is really the crux of why obesity is occurring in the West. The diet is conducive to eating too much food in too short a period of time. and that is producing not only too much energy entering the system, but the wrong sort of energy. There's a lack of fibre, for example. There's a lack of high quality proteins. There's too much refined carbohydrate. There's too much fructose. There's too much sugar, and this is causing nutrient overload. And this nutrient overload, through more than one mechanism, is likely causing insulin resistance. And this insulin resistance is the driver of the metabolic syndrome. The metabolic syndrome is likely what is causing obesity, and maybe what is the cause of heart disease as well, and many of the other typical Western diseases. So if we look at grazing as a way of eating, we actually find it actually it addresses many of the problems that we encounter from eating in a way that causes nutrient overload. Eating small meals, dividing the calories that we eat in the day over a number of meals, perhaps up to 6, or eating smaller meals and having snacks in between them and eating throughout the day. That actually is providing nutrients to the body, but it's not overloading the cells at any one time in a small period of time with too much nutrition, which would then cause them to go through these biochemical counter-regulatory mechanisms in order to try and prevent this. So I see grazing as fitting in very nicely as a strategy for losing weight or maintaining your body weight without gaining body fat. It's also a very good way of maintaining nutrients within your blood at all times throughout the day, and that makes it good for athletes. And this is why bodybuilders particularly have picked up on this style of eating, providing nutrition throughout the day, having protein constantly in your stomach, but not large amounts of it, just enough that it is providing amino acids or providing glucose for your blood. It's providing energy for your brain, it's providing energy for your skeletal muscles, but it's not overloading those cells with energy. So I think that physiologically, biochemically, grazing is a very good idea, but I do always see it fits very well for myself with modern living. I do find it very difficult to find time to sit down and cook food more than perhaps once a day in a way that I spend a lot of time preparing food, and therefore grazing is actually a much better way, particularly if you're very busy all the time, to get good quality nutrition. It's much easier to prepare smaller meals that you can carry around with you during the day than it is to with no planning at all, try to provide yourself with good nutrition. And it's very it stops you getting hungry. This is one of the big advantages of it, because you've got nutrients in your blood all the time. Those appetite stimulatory pathways are never really stimulated because you're providing the nutrition that your body needs, and you never really get hungry. And I've always said the key to losing weight, or the key to maintaining your body weight, is just simply not to get hungry. If you're getting hungry, if your blood sugar is dropping and that's stimulating your appetite, you've got no chance of keeping the body fat off, because you will overeat. Humans always tend to overeat when their appetite is stimulated, and this grazing method of eating throughout the day, eating snacks throughout the day, eating smaller meals, grazing on foods, does seem to cut the appetite off, and therefore it's a very good way of maintaining your body weight or losing body fat. So I hope that was interesting. It's just really, these videos are really me theoretically talking about things to try and create discussion. I'm not in any way saying that this would work for everybody, but it works very well for me. And many people don't consider, many people are regimented into this 3 meals a day, got to have breakfast, got to have lunch, got to have tea. And is that really the way that we have in the past eaten? We don't really know. Historical records are not brilliant in terms of finding out how people lived and ate many thousands of years ago, but there is some evidence that we didn't have this regimented lifestyle: morning, breakfast, midday, lunch, evening meal, and certainly cultures around the world do differ in the way they eat. If anybody's ever seen Europeans eating from different countries, they do eat in very different ways. They have very different foods, yes, but they tend to look at meals meals in different ways, and they all have their own cultures. So there is no real right or wrong way to eat, but I do feel that this grazing method, eating more slowly, taking your time, and if you are going to eat 3 meals a day, it would be better to eat those meals over a longer period of time. What we tend to do, we sit down at breakfast, we got 15 minutes before we need to get in the car to go to work, so we eat very quickly, and that is producing nutrient overload. At lunch, we work through half an hour of our lunch, we grab 15 minutes because we're busy, and what do? We overload ourselves with nutrients again. Then we get in the evening, we have things to do, we're busy, we've got all the jobs to do that we needed to do but we couldn't do because we were at work. So what do? We eat very quickly, we get through the meal quickly, and we overload ourselves with nutrients again. Eating those meals over a longer period of time, having an hour for breakfast, having an hour for lunch, having an hour for your evening meal would go a long way, if you didn't want to adopt grazing, would go a long way to addressing the problems, because you're spreading out the consumption of that food over an hour rather than eating the same quantity of food in 15 minutes. So it's something to think of. What's your lifestyle like? Have a look at your own lifestyle. Have a look at how you eat your own food. Do you take your time when you're eating? Do you sit down? Is it a social event? Do you have a chat with your family? Or do you scoff down your food very quickly, and are you overloading your cells with nutrients? This nutrient overload is really, I think, the key to it's the pivotal factor that is causing insulin resistance and weight gain. It's not just the amount of food we eat, it's also the type of food. Most nutritionists go on about the type of food, the quality of food, but they don't really address how we eat, the social aspects of how we eat, and the timings as well. I think meal timings and the way we eat, the way we should put more of the energy that we have in the day towards the start of the day, and then slowly taper off the amount we eat during the day. These meal timings they've been largely, there is a lot of research on meal timings, and it's very interesting research. And if you go to my blog, www.robertbarrington.net, there are quite a few review articles on there looking at meal timings, which are quite interesting. So have a look at your own meal plan, have a look at the way you eat, be honest with yourself, assess yourself. If you think you're eating too much food in too short a period of time, and you think you might be causing a nutrient overload in your system, that is something, I think, it's one of the things that you could address to improve your nutrition. It's very easy to do. You need to simply eat higher quality foods, and you need to spread them out throughout the day, and if you do that, I do think you will improve your health. So I hope that's been interesting. If you have any comments, please leave them in the comments box below, and I will try to get back to you as soon as I can.